So my name is Adele Carpenter, and I'm a software engineer at Trifork Amsterdam. Most of my day I spend building and maintaining Java and Kotlin applications for the educational sector. So actually, probably unlike most of you in this room, I'm not an Android developer. So I would just actually like to say right now that I'm really, really happy to be here today. It has been a long couple of years for all of us, and this is actually my first in-person conference as a speaker, so please, I ask you, be gentle. And of course, thank you. And I've been blessed with the after lunch slot, which is probably one of the toughest. So who had the beef at the lunch today? Yes, did you like it? Was it all right? Good. I enjoyed it too, but I do hope it doesn't put you in too much of a food coma. But I do think you've actually made a really good choice for an after lunch slot because I'm going to be exploring case studies in a storytelling format, and then we'll pull out the lessons that we can apply to software engineering. So it's a little bit of drama and you need a little bit of imagination, all right? Are you ready? Yes, great, let's go. So our first case study begins on September 8th, 1989. It's 4:25 p.m. and partner 394 from Oslo to Hamburg has just hit its cruising altitude north of the coast of Denmark. The first officer on this flight is Finn Peter Berg, who's only 4 months away from retirement. He's been flying the majority of his adult life, and even though he still loves flying, he really is looking forward to retirement. He's just getting tired of all the ancillary crap associated with being both a pilot and a flight operations manager for a struggling charter flight company. He wants less stress at work, more time with the grandkids. So what kind of stress is he under? Well, 45 minutes earlier, he was arguing with the in-flight caterer over overdue catering bills. The situation was so bad that the flight actually wouldn't be cleared to depart until the catering bill had been settled. So Finn did the only thing that he could do, and he pulled out his wallet and he paid the bill with his own money. And that's super annoying in and of itself, but but earlier than that, he was spending time with his flight mechanic trying to resolve an issue. The left AC generator wasn't working, and without 2 working generators, again, they wouldn't be cleared for takeoff. So they decide to use the backup generator, but all of this causes the flight to be delayed by an hour. But by now, you know, we're cruising, this is all dealt with, so Berg is just relaxing into the cruise. He looks over to his captain, who would be on this side, his good friend of 30 years, and the captain looks back at Berg knowingly, and they both chuckle and they roll their eyes. Thousands of flying hours experience apiece, and still stressing over the catering. The glory days of aviation are well and truly over. So at this point, Berg notices another aircraft approaching at high speed between 2 layers of cloud. He goes, "Look, at your 11 o'clock, an F-16, the captain replies, as an F-16 zooms overhead. So let's move back a few meters into the cabin. Here, in contrast to the cockpit, the atmosphere is buzzing. Half the head office of the Norwegian shipping company Wilhelmsen are on their way to officially name the latest ship in the fleet, the Topaz. And with limited places, all 50 passengers have actually had to win their seats. So everyone's in a great mood and they're all enjoying the onboard service. In the back of the cabin, we find Turid Birkeland. She is on a flight as a reward for 26 years of service. And she's actually to be Topaz's godmother. So part of that honor means that she needs to write a speech for the ceremony. So she's sitting in the back of the plane and she's scribbling feverishly in a notebook, and her glass of champagne is dancing on the tray table. But then she stops writing, and then she notices that the champagne glass is still dancing. If anything, it's dancing a little bit more vigorously. But she's never flown in a plane with propellers before, so she just assumes that that's part of the experience. But suddenly, the glass flies off the tray table and smashes into the window next to her. The nose of the plane turns violently to the right, as if it were pushed. Turud feels herself being pulled towards the ceiling of the cabin, but she is held in place by her seatbelt. However, a flight attendant in the middle of serving drinks is not so lucky. She crashes into the ceiling and looks to be badly injured. Panicked, Turud noticed something in the corner of her eye. She looks out the window and sees a piece of metal flash past. The wings. So wingless, the plane rapidly accelerates downward, and with seconds it crashes into the sea below. None of the 55 souls on board survive, leaving behind grieving families and a broken shipping company. So let's fast forward a bit. It's July 1993, 4 years since Flight 394 went down. So I can see the lead investigator, Finn Heimdall, sitting down at his IBM PS2 computer at the head office of the Accident Investigation Board of Norway. He's opening up WordPerfect to put the finishing touches on his flight investigation report. And he stares at the screen, his index fingers hovering over the keyboard. In the 90s, computers are still kind of new. And he's like, oh, where is the C? And he finds it before finishing his current train of thought. This moment he pauses, he sits back in his chair, takes a deep breath, stretches his arms overhead, and he exhales, and the true magnitude of the last 4 years bear down on him all at once. Because not even Finn, highly experienced investigator who has seen it all, could have predicted the long chain of events that led to the crash of Flight 394. So he sits there and he's thinking back to the first few days after the crash. Not a lot is known at that point, except that the plane disappeared off radar after making a sharp turn to the right. Several bodies are quickly recovered along with floating debris some distance away. The larger distance gives a clue that the plane broke up in midair. So already at this point, Finn has two possible theories, and let's follow his process. So he knows about the F-16 spotted in the area just before the crash. So could a sonic boom of the jet cause the plane to disintegrate midair? And less than a year ago, Pan Am Flight 103 was shot down over Lockerbie, Scotland. Did an act of terror bring the plane down? Both theories are compelling enough for the media to circulate them widely. The readers seem to want answers just as badly as the victims' families. The pressure is on. So Finn and his team get to work analysing the debris from the seafloor. After a few days, the debris field on the seafloor. So after a few days, they do have, in fact, a detailed map. And sure enough, the tail is quite a distance away from the main wreckage. So both theories are still possible. But not long after this discovery and following intense media pressure, the military presents an affidavit from the F-16 pilot. He absolutely swears that he was more than 1,000 feet away from the aircraft, and if there were any sonic boom, then that could not have impacted that flight. So this is enough for Finn and for the public that the military was not involved. So a bomb or a missile strike at the rear of the plane is looking increasingly more likely. Emotions are running high. Finn sends parts of the wreckage for analysis for explosive residue. This is a logical next step given the evidence that he has so far. So his hands are trembling slightly as he opens the envelope. His worst fears appear confirmed. There are, in fact, traces of explosive residue on the aircraft. But before Finn can really process this information, the media publishes the details of the report. They're certain terrorists did this. But Finn, not so sure. Of course, he wants to wrap up the investigation quickly. He has a family too, and when he's on a report or during an investigation, he spends a lot of time away from them. So he's personally invested in a quick result. But he knows that doing his job correctly means removing any and all doubt associated with his findings. So the next morning, Finn gathers his team and he asks, how can we prove ourselves wrong? What details might we be ignoring because they don't fit the bomb theory? What else could cause a mid-air breakup? To answer the first question, someone in the team suggests a more detailed analysis of the blast residue. What are the exact levels? Is it what we would expect if there was a bomb on the plane or if it was hit by a missile? Could there be other potential sources of the residue? So Finn agrees and he asks his team members to follow up. And in response to the second question, another team member points out that no terrorist groups have actually claimed credit for the attack. If terrorists did do this, more than likely they would claim credit. And there are just so many possibilities of things that could cause a mid-air breakup. So really, the only way to limit the scope is to investigate the black box, which is almost ready for analysis. So indeed, further examination of the blast residue on the wreckage reveals that the quantities are actually too small to have been caused by an explosion on board the aircraft. In fact, the difference is orders of magnitude. So the bomb theory is looking less likely. But if not from a bomb, then what? So eventually, Finn and his team determined that the residue likely came from the seafloor. So historically, many battles have been fought off the coast of Denmark, and it was likely from old ammunition or weapons that drifted down from the surface onto the seafloor, covering the wreckage, which is a really unsatisfying answer, but it is the most likely explanation. So thanks to the commitment of Finn and his team to finding the root cause of the crash, the victims' families are one step closer to getting answers. Now, they might feel angry at having to wait and they might scream fake news, but Finn's discipline in questioning himself and his team thoroughly and rigorously, in my opinion, is to be admired. The temptation to blame terrorists in the face of intense pressure would be too real. Now, in software engineering, unlike air crash investigations, we don't often have the luxury or the priority of vast resources to find the root cause of an issue. But we do still face external pressure from managers or customers to find a solution to a pressing technical issue. And we face the temptation to implement the first result that fits. So in those moments, we can take a leaf out of Finn's book when we have a compelling theory by questioning ourselves. How can I prove myself wrong? What details might I be ignoring because it doesn't fit my theory or solution? What else could cause this issue or situation? These are also great questions to throw into meetings. For example, if it's not your area of expertise, but you want to help your team. And perhaps even more helpful, if it is your area of expertise. Experience does have a funny way of obscuring our blind spots. So we're back in Norway. Finn and his team have just ruled out 2 potential causes of the crash, and they're really low on leads at this point. But thankfully, the black box is ready for analysis, which obviously is orange and contains not 1 but 2 recording devices, which have highly original names. Does anyone know the names? I think I heard it. Yes, excellent. That's exactly right. So cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. But unfortunately, the voice recorder is a dead end. There is some pre-flight discussion recorded, including the first officer complaining about having to pay the catering bill. But as the engines power up, the recording mysteriously stops. So that leaves the flight data recorder, which is not exactly a dead end. It's just epically confusing. This is an older mechanical recorder where the needle moves up and down on a metal tape, as you can see on the image here. You've got the metal stylus or the needle and the metal tape running through, kind of like an old school heart monitor or a seismograph. Anyway, that's not the confusing part. Finn's seen these before because, you know, he's a professional. And what's strange about it, though, is that there's a double line for the altitude reading, both immediately before the crash and intermittently in several of the flights before. A double line like the one you see here is actually highly unusual. So unusual, in fact, that Finn needs to send the data recorder to the manufacturer in the US, who in turn needs to call an expert out of retirement in order to get an explanation. And the retired expert says that the double line is actually caused by a severe vibration, a vibration much greater than expected during a normal flight. So Finn starts looking for potential causes. Finn takes himself down to the lab where the wreckage is being reconstructed. These are actual photos from the flight investigation report. And as you can see, it is a painstaking process, putting the aircraft back together piece by piece. I think you've got to be a little bit obsessive and a little bit crazy to do this work, but it's important. And Finn knows that the wreckage can tell you a lot, especially when the black boxes leave little to go on. Anyway, he meets with the team and learns that they're focusing their attention on the tail section and specifically the APU. So most aircraft do have an auxiliary power unit or an APU. The APU is used to provide power while you're on the ground before the engines are started up. It's generally located at the back of the aircraft and it is not designed to be in operation during flight, except in rare cases such as an emergency. But the reconstruction team have found evidence that the APU was in fact in operation during the flight. The backup generator that I told you about earlier, the one that the pilot and the engineer decided to use, was actually not a backup generator. It was an undocumented feature of the APU. And not only was it running during the flight, but one of the struts or rods attaching it to the aircraft was broken. So maybe the maintenance records can provide some clues. This is pre-digitization, so you don't want to be going through decades of maintenance records without some clue of where to look. So Finn asked his team to pay attention to the tail while reviewing the maintenance records. And they find that one of the bolts connecting the tail to the fuselage, which is the cabin, was replaced only weeks before the crash. So Finn checks back in with the reconstruction team about this. And this is where it gets really juicy. Because what they uncover is actually a scandal that goes all the way to the White House. Well, the flying White House, Air Force One. President Clinton has just taken office, which is kind of fitting given the scandals that followed him throughout his presidency, but he is not to blame for this one, though. So let's set the scene for the big reveal. 1993 Finn, he reaches into the bottom drawer of his desk. He pulls out a dusty bottle of Aquafit and a small glass. It's a tradition of his to celebrate the conclusion of an investigation and to commemorate the victims. He takes a small sip, pauses for a silent moment, and describes what happened, one index finger at a time. I will spare you my Norwegian accent, okay? You're just stuck with Australian, all right? So the crash was caused by a loss of control due to the destruction of the tail. The destruction of the tail was caused by a long chain of factors resulting in a resonant vibration. The replacement of one of the bolts connecting the vertical fin to the fuselage 2 weeks before the crash altered the natural frequency of the tail section. Eventually, the frequency of the tail matched that of the running APU, connected to a broken strut of poor quality and unknown origin. The resulting vibration grew in amplitude until it shook the tail section so hard that the bolts holding the fin to the fuselage sheared off, breaking the plane into 2 pieces. Without the stabilizing effect of the tail, the plane turned sharply and rolled out of the sky. Inspection of the sheared bolts showed that 3 of the 4 were not of the specified hardness and tensile strength. Further investigation showed that these bolts were counterfeit. Now, this phenomenon here that we see with the tail shaking, I think it's quite fitting for this conference. It's actually called flutter. So after the publication of Finn's report in Norway, the US Aviation Authority, the FAA, conducted their own investigation into the counterfeit air parts market. There was a huge investigation that found the problem of counterfeit parts was so rampant that such parts were even found on Air Force One, supposedly the most scrutinized aircraft in the world. And not only were the parts counterfeit, there was also a market for counterfeit FAA assurance tags, quality assurance tags, where suppliers of counterfeit parts would actually sign the name of known aircraft part inspectors. So as an operator, you could buy counterfeit parts and not even realize. Maybe your only signal would be the price. So at this point, we might scoff. They should have known. But if you were in the precarious financial position of partner, with your pilot paying the catering bills, it would be tempting to pay the lower cost, take a cursory look at the tag, and just not ask too many questions. I mean, it's got the tag. You did your job. So there is, in fact, a lot to unpack in this case, and I find it very fascinating from an engineering point of view. The final report, I think, is over 200 pages, and I read them for you and condensed it down to 20 minutes, so you're welcome. The long chain of seemingly unlikely events that cost 55 people their lives, the incremental choices that seemed reasonable at the time, but deadly in combination. So here again is the map of all the events that contributed to the demise of Partner Flight 394. And you don't need to study it right now. I will be making my slides available after the talk. It's just to give an impression of the scale of the events and their relationships. But you can see here down the bottom that the first decision that contributed to this disaster was actually 10 years before the crash. A form of technical debt, if you allow the analogy. And if we follow the sequence all the way through to the end, we end up with 3 counterfeit bolts. So in my role as a software engineer, I work with open source software on the JVM. So by strict definition, you could argue counterfeit isn't really possible. Original source code, there for download, no need to make an illegal copy. But what about snippets of code that we copy into our code base? We scoff. Everyone knows Stack Overflow is just a suggestion and we shouldn't blindly copy paste from it. But there's other sources of code snippets, documentation, blogs, Git, community forums, conference slides. I've certainly blindly copy-pasted code into my project before as a nervous junior working on yet another new technology, making myself feel better because I know I have code reviews and testing to back me up. But the truth is that I'm responsible for every line of code that I write. That includes code that I've copied and pasted. It's my role to understand every line of it, pull it apart, dissect it. What's it importing and why? And the reason that I care about code quality is not just because I want a pat on the head for being a perfect developer. The reason I care is because real people use my software. Teachers and school kids, in fact. So what can we learn from Finn and his team to help us improve the quality of the software that we contribute to? So we can start by seeing outcomes as a result of a chain of events that we can learn from if we examine them. Taking our time to investigate all options. Often the time constraints we put on ourselves are fairly arbitrary. Sometimes they're not, but often they are. So we can accept responsibility for the code we write and paste. No counterfeit code, as it were. Not just because a Git blame is a thing, but because you care about your users, your colleagues, your future self. Following the evidence, perhaps you have seen a similar problem or issue before, but is it really the same? What assumptions are you making? Like, look at the current situation as it is, not as you want it to be. And of course, questioning ourselves and our opinions rigorously. Okay, so let's take a little breather here before we launch into the next case study. So this photo I actually took yesterday morning on my way here. So nothing like a sunrise above the clouds. So this might sound a little bit odd to hear, given the seriousness of this topic, but the next case study is actually one of my favorites, and I'm excited to share it with you. And I will probably let you know, we'll probably run a couple of minutes over time, but please bear with me here. So it's 5:05 p.m., cold evening, just after Christmas in December 1978. The crew of United Airlines Flight 173 are preparing to land a fully laden DC-8 in Portland, Oregon. It's been an uneventful flight for the passengers, except for maybe the usual Christmas chaos at the airport before departure. So the first officer and the pilot flying is 45-year-old Rod Beebe. So although he is an experienced pilot, he is relatively new to the DC-8, which has 4 engines and room for 180 passengers. And it's a narrow body, so it's got 1 aisle, not 2. It is a career milestone for Rod, and it makes it almost worth being away from his young family so soon after Christmas. So he's now down to an altitude of 10,000 feet, and he asks his friend and captain, Melbourne McBroom, to lower the landing gear. McBroom obliges. Suddenly, though, a loud thump echoes through the aircraft. This is followed by a jarring vibration and a sudden pull of the nose to the right. Beebe and McBroom scan their instruments. The gear light is not illuminated. So unless the light is malfunctioning, this means that the gear is not fully extended. And an error deploying the landing gear would actually confirm what their sensors had just told them. What on earth was that? Yelps Second Officer Forrest Mendenhall, who goes by the nickname Frosty. Beebe and McBroom look at Frosty and they look back at each other. They both know that landing without the main gear is an extremely risky maneuver and could easily result in disaster. So it's time to put their training to use. Captain McBroom radios Portland approach and tells them that Flight 173 will be staying at 5,000 feet and entering a holding pattern while they attempt to resolve the issue. They'll keep the pace steady at 170 knots. We got a gear problem, we'll let you know. Portland provides a heading for the hold. So over the next 25 minutes, the 3 men discuss and accomplish all relevant emergency and precautionary actions in an effort to reassure themselves that the gear is in fact down and locked. Frosty even enters the cabin for a visual confirmation from the wing indicators. They pop up when the gear pops down. And it's dark by now, but he can see those indicators clearly. So Frosty re-enters the cockpit to find the captain discussing the likelihood of emergency landing with the head flight attendant, Joan Wheeler. So he's an old school gentleman and he doesn't want to frighten the passengers or hurry the girls, as he put it. He tells the ground that he and the crew will just take their time and they'll get everybody ready before attempting a landing at Portland Airport. So the ground keeps them in a holding pattern. So Joan, she returns to the cabin, and in unison with the rest of the cabin crew, she calmly begins taking steps to maximize the chances of survival in an emergency landing. She knows the plane is in a safe holding pattern, so she can take her time and do everything by the book. So in her 14 years, she's never, as a flight attendant for United, she's never had to prepare for such a landing, but she does make it look effortless. She patiently reminds people of the brace position that they've all forgotten already since the start of the flight. She asks able-bodied men to sit in front of the emergency exits. She instructs mothers on how best to wrap their babies, and she reassures children. And please excuse me while I perpetuate gender roles here, but it was 1978. So in the cockpit, the three men continue exhausting all avenues to ensure that the gear is in fact down and locked. Yet in between directions from the captain, Bibi and Frosty are passing each other increasingly worried looks. It's now 5:55 and flight 173 has been in a holding pattern at low altitude with the gear down for 50 minutes. That's 50 minutes. So Bibi asks Frosty how much fuel is remaining. Frosty stutters, 4,000 pounds, one in each tank. Bibi does some quick math. At the current burn rate, this might be enough for 18 minutes. At that moment, the approach tower gives the advice for the next heading. It's towards the airport. So Bibi breathes a quick sigh of relief, says to himself, surely we're going in now. But the captain, still focused on the landing gear, asks Frosty to do yet another sweep of the cabin to check how things are going. The captain's number one priority is a safe emergency landing with a fully prepared cabin. Frosty obliges, but he would much prefer to be assisting the flight deck as they make the final preparations for landing, which must only be a couple of minutes away. Frosty returns to the cockpit at 6:01 and tells the cabin that the cabin is 2 or 3 minutes away from being ready. But at that moment, he feels the plane bank to the left, away from the airport. Shit, he thinks to himself. Another hold. But before he can say anything, the captain asks about the welfare of the passengers. Hey, Frosty, how are they doing back there? Oh, they're pretty calm and cool. Some are more anxious than others. I did my best to try to reassure them while I was back there. The captain replies, okay, well, 2 minutes before landing, about 4 miles out, pick up the mic and tell them to assume the brace position. Frosty confirms and then takes the opportunity to gently remind the captain of the fuel situation. You know, we got 3,000 pounds of fuel, and that's it. That equates to about 13 minutes. Without flinching, the captain advises Frosty on what to do if the gear collapses on landing. 4 more minutes pass. The captain sucks Frosty and Bibi into a further conversation about the emergency landing and whether the gear is down or not. Joan enters the cockpit and announces, well, I think we're ready. The captain acknowledges and advises they'll be landing in about 5 minutes. While the captain wraps up the final details with Joan, Bibi addresses Frosty. He's like, hey mate, I think you just lost number 4 engine. Joan thanks the cabin and leaves the cockpit. Buddy, Bibi continues, I think you just lost an engine. This time the captain is listening and he seems surprised. Why did we lose an engine? Bibi utters just one word, the concern on his face is clear as day. Fuel. It's 6:07 now, and finally the captain asks for a heading back towards the airport. The plane starts banking to the left. Engine number 3 stops. The official term is a flame out. Now the fuel situation has the captain's attention. He asks Frosty to open the crossfeeds. This allows whatever fuel is left to power the two remaining engines. The captain insists that the tank that was feeding engine number 3 still has 1,000 pounds of fuel. Tensions heighten as the captain keeps barking at Frosty about the crossfeeds and the extra 1,000 pounds of fuel that doesn't exist. At 6:09, the captain asks Portland approach for a final heading towards the airport. He does not convey the seriousness of the situation. The airport still expects a landing where the gear might collapse. He follows up by asking how far away the runway is. The answer is 18 nautical miles. That's 6.5 minutes. They have 5 minutes of fuel left, tops. Sure enough, 4 minutes later at 6:13, engine 1 and 2 begin to splutter. Flame out is inevitable. Finally, the captain declares a mayday. Within seconds, the plane clips a tree and then another before plowing some power distribution cables. The plane slows as the wires stretch before crashing into 2 unoccupied homes and coming to rest in a field. There's no fire. Most of the 181 passengers on board exit the plane unharmed. Captain and BB are injured but alive. Frosty and Joan, though, along with 8 others, are dead. So the next morning, the newspaper hits the stands, and without yet knowing what has happened in the cockpit, the media labels the captain a hero, citing the miraculous landing without any injuries or deaths on the ground. And survivors praise the flight attendants for their preparedness and the orderly evacuation. It could have been a lot worse. But why did it happen in the first place? So United Flights 173 is arguably the most important crash in aviation history. If you ever took a flight after 1985, I guarantee that your safety has been impacted by this flight. And in the final report, investigators list both the cause of the crash and a contributing factor. So the cause was the captain's failure to properly monitor the aircraft's fuel state and to respond to both the low fuel state and the crew members' advisories regarding the fuel state. And the factor contributing was the failure of either BB and Frosty to either fully comprehend the criticality of the fuel state or to successfully communicate their concern to the captain. The most alarming part of these findings were that they weren't isolated. They were just the latest in a string of air crashes with similar causes. So in the 1960s and 70s, the number of flights were going up dramatically, as were the number of crashes. So for example, the most infamous one is this one in Tenerife in 1977. This one actually killed 583 passengers and crew, and the cause for this one was miscommunication, both within both cockpits, but also with air traffic control playing a role as well. So NASA were kind of already aware of this human factors issue, and they'd been working on something called crew resource management training, or CRM, not customer relationship management. Today it's crew resource management. And in the report of Flight 173, airlines were to give this training to their pilots. So specifically, there should be 2 parts: participative management for captains. So that means providing a non-threatening environment that actively encourages collaboration. And then assertiveness training for other cockpit crew members. So how to get your point across effectively in a non-threatening manner. So in modern terms, you could actually summarize this as psychological safety in the cockpit, which I find really interesting because this predates the concept of psychological safety, or the term psychological safety, by about 20 years. And the other thing that's really cool is the assertiveness, the emphasis is on the assertiveness of the co-pilots. So it's not just the responsibility of the captain to provide a safe space. The other crew members also need to take responsibility for how their advice is received. And in the decades that have followed the implementation of CRM, starting with United Airlines in 1981, the culture of aviators has in fact changed markedly, and it's no longer captain knows best. So you could argue that in software the stakes aren't as high as human lives, but what if your failure to speak up sparks a chain of events that results in a data breach, a loss of faith in the major customer, or worse, a loss of faith in yourself? So being prepared to speak up is different from knowing when to speak up. So we already saw some tips from Finn on how to observe if decisions are ignoring key evidence. So I think Captain McBroom can also teach us some things about when to speak up when something requires further examination. So he can teach us about situational awareness. So put simply, situational awareness is knowing what's going on around you. So I am aware that we're on time right now. I have about 2 to 3 minutes left. If you did choose to leave for a cigarette or whatever, that's totally fine by me. There is a recording, okay? Just want to let you know out of courtesy. So in the case study, we saw Captain McBroom getting increasingly fixated on the landing gear, which left him unable to process the criticality of the fuel situation. He had lost his situational awareness. And if you are the proud owner of a human brain, it's actually very, very easy to lose your situational awareness. And as an engineer, if you fail to maintain your situational awareness, you end up with a perfectly engineered feature that nobody wants, or a hot fix for a small ordering issue that leaves your app unable to process payments. So how can we maintain situational awareness in our roles as software professionals? This is a list that I've adopted from crew resource management training, interpreted for a software engineering context. So you can maintain situational awareness by considering the impact of stress and your workload on your performance. So for example, how many tickets are assigned to you right now? How many meetings do you have planned? Which deadlines are real? Which ones are arbitrary? Be honest with yourself and others on what you can accomplish. So having an appreciation of the automation and abstractions present. So are you aware of the abstractions that you interact with, even at a rudimentary level? Could you find the resources that you need if the situation required it? Paying attention to and meeting your physiological needs. Did you sleep enough? Are you hydrated? Did you eat? Did you poop? Recognizing that you can carry around preconceptions and a bias wherever you go. So is your gut instinct actually just bias? Why does a certain course of action appeal to you? What evidence do you have to support your position? Evidence against. And being aware of your limitations as it results to your abilities, experience, or training, and communicating them when relevant. So what are your limitations or weak spots in your role? How can you patch them? Who can help you? What knowledge could you share with others? And crucially, maintaining situational awareness does not have to be a solo endeavor. So by encouraging an environment where everybody can speak up and share their knowledge and challenge ideas, then you lift the situational awareness of your team and your organization, your crew. And this has been known and practiced in aviation for years already, leads to better decision making and better results. Thank you. So I am mindful that I did go a little bit over time. I really do apologize for that, but I will be around for the next day and a half. So please do come up to me, ask your questions, debate with me. I do not mind. Enjoy the rest of the conference.